everybody. How are you? You made it. First day of CircleCityCon. We're wrapping it up. We're getting right down to the end of the day. We got plenty more coming tomorrow. I hope you all have had a good time. Really excited to be here. I'm Alyssa Miller, and I can't thank you enough for being a part of this event. And hopefully we got some more stuff to just keep those juices flowing and keep you excited and coming back for more. So let's pop right into this. And I'll start with just simply a little introduction of myself for those of you who maybe don't know me. Again, my name is Alyssa Miller. First and foremost, I'm a hacker and a researcher. Been a hacker all my life. Bought my first computer when I was 12, broke into some stuff I probably shouldn't have. But, you know, that's kind of how a lot of us got started, right? And I do a lot of research. So I like to get out and just dig into technology. I've always had a passion for it. I really, really love it. And so I like to dig into it, figure out how things work, tell other people about the stuff I find, and just, yeah, make technology something that we can all learn from. Professionally, however, I am a BISO, a business information security officer for an organization called S&P Global. And I am the BISO for their ratings division. So if you want to ask me another time, I can tell you all about what a BISO is, but just look at it as kind of like a CISO, but just for a particular division and with more of a business focus than just strictly security like you would see with a CISO. How's that sound? Easy enough. I'm an author and a blogger. My first book is actually in electronic preview right now. You can buy it in advance and actually start reading it before it's even done. I also am a blogger. I do blogs on my website and also on behalf of different organizations and so forth. And then finally, I'm a former software developer. That's how I got my start in tech. My first full-time job was as a programmer for a large financial technologies company. And that sort of pivoted into a security role where now I've been in security the last 16 years. So we're talking threat modeling today. Ooh, I bet a lot of people cringe when they hear those words, threat modeling. Oh, you know, devs hear that word, security people hear that phrase. And what do we think about? Well, we think about this big heavyweight process, right? We have to create these diagrams, these data flow diagrams that map out our entire system, where data comes in, where it crosses trust boundaries, where it gets stored, how it's transmitted, what systems process it. And we build this whole big map, and then we're going to use that to figure out our threats. And as we start to look at the threats to that system, well, we got to categorize them. So we're going to use a framework like Stride. And Stride has all these really interesting technical terms like spoofing and tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, yada, 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 yada. And if you're like me and you've ever been in threat modeling, you know that those categories can sometimes be problematic. But we categorize them. We get all our threats identified. We put them in these categories. But now we're going to bring in this other idea, the pasta methodology. So how are we going to lay this all out? How are we going to do this over and over and make it repeatable? And so you see, we've got, you know, this pasta methodology. It just lays this all out. And oh my goodness, you know, define objectives, define technical scope, application decomposition, threat analysis, vulnerability and weakness analysis, attack modeling, risk and impact analysis. Oh my God, this sounds like a lot of stuff. And yeah, it ends up being. And so now we've got all our vulnerability or all our threats figured out, and we've gone through all these different processes, and now we need to start to prioritize them. So we have this thing called dread, and this is how we're going to categorize the overall risk of these threats. And, you know, then we've got this Octive process, which maybe we want to throw away all this and we want to approach it just a little bit differently. So we're going to go with Octive. And what does all this have in common? Well, it's so complex. So we're going to make it easier. We're going to come up with this thing called the CAPEC taxonomy, and we're going to use that to identify threats. That'll help us out, right? All the common threats that we might face or find in various systems, we'll put them all in a big fat database to make everybody's life easier. How's that working for you? Probably not so well. This is why people hear the term threat modeling and they start to freak out, right? Like, I mean, oh my God, who's going to do this? So there's a lot of people out there who are really into threat modeling. I am. That's why I'm here. Adam Shostak wrote this book years ago on threat modeling, what most, myself included, have considered the gold standard for threat modeling. And it defines a lot of processes, and it references things like Stride and PASTA and how we can use those in our methodology and how we move this forward. But there's one thing that still comes into play. It's always in common, it seems, when we talk threat modeling, and that's this need for a big design cycle where we start our threat modeling. We look at the design of our system, we figure it out, and then we're going to figure out where the threats are. But that's really 2008 thinking. Anybody know why I picked 2008 as the date? Well, because it was in 2008 that this cool thing, DevOps, showed up on the scene. Patrick Dubois, Andrew Schaefer, they got together and they had this idea of how they were going to improve software development and software deployment by bringing dev and ops together. And we kind of left security out in the cold. And we deserve to be left out in the cold, quite honestly, for those of my security practitioners out there, because we didn't move. We didn't react to this. This started up in 2008, 2009, DevOps Days first was held. By 2012, the first time security really spoke up about it, when Gene Kim and Josh Corman presented on it at RSA, we were like years down the road already, and organizations were already doing what they considered to be DevOps. So with DevOps, we start seeing things like CI/CD, and we see these fast-paced development cycles where we probably don't have those big design cycles. So threat modeling just kind of gets left out in the cold. But threat modeling is important. In fact, in 2019, Puppet and CircleCI released their State of DevOps report. And one of the things that they looked at were security practices and how they impacted security posture versus how frequently we do them. And what you see in the upper left there are a lot of the security practices we all know and love: penetration testing and static code analysis and security requirements. Oh, secure by design. We've heard that phrase before, right? All those things are in the upper left. We do them a lot, but they don't improve our security posture a whole lot. But what happens when I go down to the lower right here? The things we don't do as often, but they really have a strong impact on our security posture. Well, that's where I see collaborative efforts like threat modeling. This is why threat modeling is important. But again, it gets left out in the cold. People forget about it. We don't do it often. So, this is something that frustrates me as somebody who's always seen the value and really enjoyed threat modeling and thought it was an invaluable thing. And so I decided to try to figure out what we could do about this. How do we make threat modeling work in a DevOps world where our developers and our SREs and our engineers and our ops folks, they all feel a part of it, and they don't feel like it's incompatible with those processes. And so to do that, I figured, okay, we got to just get back to basics. I got to think about what is actually threat modeling at its core and how can we look at it differently. So I had two questions. One, let's just define it. What is threat modeling? And then why? Why do we threat model? I mean, I threw it up there for you that, okay, it's got this huge impact on, our security posture, but why? Why is it so impactful? Why is this one process so important to us? So I set out on a mission a couple of years ago. I decided I'm going to figure this out. I want to know how are we going to do threat modeling, and how am I going to bring threat modeling into the DevSecOps world? So I went looking for just a definition of what is threat modeling. Let's see if I can start there. And I started with every application security person's favorite place. I went to OWASP. OWASP will have the answers. They have the answers to everything. I love OWASP. They've got the top 10. They have all their various projects. I love the crap out of OWASP. Let's go ask. They'll help us out. This was what I found. I'm not even going to read this to you. It's so long. This is not getting back to basics. This wasn't helpful to me. I read this. I looked at this. I can't take this to my engineers and say, here, this is what you need to do. We need to do threat modeling. Threat modeling is this. This doesn't help. No, this wasn't going to get me anywhere. I mean, you see how lengthy this is and how focused it is on technical security terms that those people that I want to collaborate with in my threat modeling process, they aren't even necessarily going to understand what these words mean. So, all right, OWASP, you kind of let me down here. Let's try another one. If OWASP isn't going to help me, well, then I'm going to check out Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, if it's there, it's the truth, right? I mean, Wikipedia, everything in Wikipedia is true. We know that. Okay, maybe not. But I thought it was worth a shot. So Wikipedia has a definition of threat modeling, as you would expect, and this one was clearly written by more security people. Again, lengthy, focus on really complex concepts and just putting things in terms that aren't easily understood. Why? I need a simpler definition than this. This is so long and involved. How am I going to take this and use a definition like this to credibly drive change in how we bring threat modeling to a DevSecOps culture? It's just not going to happen. I put this out in front of people and their minds go blank. Their eyes glaze over. They look down at their cell phones. They want to do nothing with this. This doesn't encourage people. Okay. Well, I mentioned Adam Shostak before. Adam Shostak, you saw it was Microsoft Press book. What about Microsoft? Microsoft has the SDL. Surely they have a perfect definition for threat modeling, because threat modeling is a part of Microsoft's SDL. That's better, but it's still not what I was looking for. At least here we start to get into things that are maybe not quite as technical sounding. It's not as lengthy. Okay, so it's an engineering technique. I know engineering techniques. I'm going to identify threats. Okay, I think I know what a threat is. I know what attacks are. I know what vulnerabilities are. If I'm an engineer, do I know what we mean by countermeasures? Probably. Okay, we're doing good. That could affect my application. Well, that's bad. So I want to make sure I do something about that. But then, I can use threat modeling to shape my application's design to meet my company's security objectives and reduce risk. Oh, well, okay. So this is just another one of those security things you're telling me I have to do? All right. Yeah, maybe not. So still not the definition I'm looking for. And that's what it comes down to. I just couldn't find the definition that I wanted. So I kind of took a step back and said, all right, I need to get to the very most basic definition of what threat modeling is. Because before I can reshape this and start to say, hey, this is how we do it in DevSecOps, or start to bring any change, I need to be able to articulate in words that anybody can understand, whether they're engineers, whether they're my project managers, whether they're my product managers. I don't care. I want them to understand what threat modeling is. So how do I explain it to them? So it finally hit me. Threat modeling is asking one simple question. What could possibly go wrong? I'm designing a system. I'm making modifications to a system. I'm adding new functionality to an application. Based on that, what could possibly go wrong? That's all I want to know. That's what threat modeling is. Now think about this for a minute. Everybody threat models. We threat model every single day. Think about it. If you, like me, you live out in the suburbs and you're going to go down to the city for some event or something, and you want to make sure you're going to be safe. Maybe you're worried about the crime. I don't know. It depends on which city you're going to, I guess, and which part of the city. But those are things you're going to start to think about. You're going to start to think about, am I going to be safe? What could possibly happen? Could I get in a car wreck? Could I have car trouble? Could I have a problem finding parking? These are all threats to my enjoyment of the evening if I'm going to, say, a show in the city somewhere. That's threat modeling at its core. Those are all the things I'm thinking about that could possibly go wrong. And why do I think about those things that could possibly go wrong? So I can do something about it. So finally, a definition that I was comfortable with, a definition that I felt I could defend. Threat modeling is identifying the likely threats to a system to inform the design of security countermeasures. Okay, it's still kind of got that security thing in there, but that's necessary. But okay, so I'm just identifying threats so that I can inform the design that I'm going to use. Who came up with this? Well, I did. And you know what? I'm not super thrilled with it. It wasn't the best definition after all. After I started to put this into practice, I still didn't like it. But it was helpful because it was short and sweet and easy to explain. And anybody can understand this language. Now you might ask, what are security countermeasures? I mean, you know what a countermeasure is, you know it has to do with security, but what does that really mean? And what do you mean by inform the design? Alyssa, what does that mean? Well, this is the struggle with trying to come up with a definition for threat modeling. So last year, in the heart of the pandemic, myself and 14 other security practitioners, individuals who had just a passion for threat modeling, we got together and we wrote the Threat Modeling Manifesto. The goal of the Threat Modeling Manifesto was to help the world understand what threat modeling is and why it is so crucial. So we came up with a new definition. Threat modeling is analyzing representations of a system to highlight concerns about security and privacy characteristics. That's what threat modeling is. We're just going to look at representations. Now, what do representations mean? They could be diagrams. They could be verbal explanations. It could be anything that tells us about a system. And we're going to use that information then to highlight the concerns that we have from a security or privacy perspective. Okay, we can use this. This is exciting. So we put together this manifesto. But great, so we've got a definition. The next step was we had to answer the next question. The question everybody asks, why? Why should we threat model? Sure, CircleCI and Puppet said that it's going to make us more secure. It's going to have this huge impact on our security posture. But why? What does it do for us? The output of a threat model informs, there's that word again, decisions that you might make in subsequent design, development, testing, and deployment phases. So think about this for a minute. If you do threat modeling very early on, and now let's forget about design for a minute. Let's think even earlier. If I'm going to do threat modeling, what is the best place I can fit threat modeling into my DevSecOps development lifecycle? Everything starts at the user story. You want to push left? We've been talking push left in security. How long? Couple decades. How much further left can you go than the user story? So imagine for a minute, we build in threat modeling information into the user story. Well, first of all, it means we need our business people involved, right? Because the business people are the ones, they're going to write those user stories. So I need to think about threat modeling differently. I can't think about it in terms of stride anymore because I don't want to have to train business people to understand stride. But now I've got that information in my user story. So when my developer goes and takes a user story off the backlog, maybe in sprint planning, if I'm doing sprint planning, or maybe I'm truly CI/CD and they're just going and grabbing the next highest priority item. Either way, that information is in that user story. Now, do I write an entire threat model for the whole system in that user story? No. All I need my business people to do is to analyze that user story and say, all right, here's the critical assets that are a part of this user story. Maybe it's personal information, things that I have to defend. Maybe that user story represents some critical functionality and just the availability of that critical functionality is an asset. Maybe there's financial assets involved. Maybe there's trade secrets involved. Those are all assets that I have to defend. And once they can identify the assets that are associated with that particular user story, now they can sit down and in just very simple, plain language terms, describe the threats. I don't need to know if it's spoofing or tampering or repudiation. That's meaningless to anyone outside of security. And we're not writing threat models for security. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. All I need them to understand is there a risk of theft? Is there a risk of, system unavailability or the inability to deliver a critical function? Is there a risk of fraud? These are the kinds of things. This is the kind of information I want in that user story, because now my developer takes that, they get that information, they can read it, they can see immediately what it is that they need to prioritize in terms of security controls. Now, if you're really good and you're really mature, hopefully you've got engineering standards, maybe reference architectures that they can pull from in order to implement security controls. But one way or another, that engineer, that developer is able to sit down with that threat modeling information when they're getting ready to start coding, and they can now start to decide, how am I going to design my implementation of this user story? This is the informing of those decisions. But it goes further. Think about this. Not only does it inform my developers, but my developers are now creating designs, whether they're documenting them, whether it's just implementation as part of CI/CD, however they do it, they're creating this code. I have this information now. I know what the threats are. I know the countermeasures that they've implemented. That feeds my test cases. So suddenly now my QA teams can leverage this. Like, oh my gosh, we have threat modeling information. So now we know how to prioritize test cases. Maybe if we get really good at this down the road, we can automate the creation of those test cases. That would be awesome. But we're not done yet. What about my SREs? This is DevOps after all. What about that ops side? What do they get out of this? Well, boy, don't they have kind of a good understanding of what's coming their way in the first place, which ask any of your SREs or your ops teams how often they get stuck with a new technology that gets thrown at them in the 11th hour and they've got to figure out how to support it. But more importantly, because they understand from what was tested and what was prioritized and what was laid out in terms of threats and what was laid out in terms of countermeasures that the developer created in that particular user story, that now informs how they design and implement monitoring and countermeasures in the operational environment. This is the value of threat modeling. This is why threat modeling, this collaboration where we bring all these people together, either physically like traditional threat modeling where you all get together in a big meeting, or through a vehicle like the user story, this is where we start to derive value. So how do we do it? How do we go about building our methodology? Now, just like any sports team, every organization is going to have their own methodology for doing threat modeling. We all have different development pipelines. We all look at this thing just a little bit differently. We have our own needs, our own requirements, our own concerns, our own risk profiles. So when it comes to threat modeling, and when it comes to the threat modeling manifesto, the last thing we wanted to do was build a methodology that was prescriptive. So we didn't build a methodology at all. Instead, what we did was we documented values, practices, patterns, and anti-patterns that describe what is at the core of threat modeling, so that people could read through these and they could take them and they could begin to build a methodology that was tailored to their organization. And this is what threat modeling is all about. If we're talking collaboration, it needs to be something that fits into the way we work, whether it's automation, whether it's processes. How will we do this? You can't make this assumption that there's going to be some cool threat modeling tool that you're going to plug into your pipeline and that's going to do all this for you. Threat modeling doesn't work that way. Threat modeling works on the idea of collaboration. You saw the CircleCI and Puppet report. So when we set out to build this manifesto, this thing that was going to bring threat modeling to the masses, to encourage and excite people to do threat modeling in their organizations, we did not want to create a methodology, another framework, another thing to throw at the problem that might be helpful for some, but for others would be instantly rejected as not fitting their environment, as too complex, as not compatible with their high-speed dynamic development and deployment phases. So like I said, we created values, principles, patterns, and anti-patterns. We described what was most important to threat modeling, what's most important in the methodology, what are things that represent good threat modeling, and what are anti-patterns that threaten to destroy threat modeling. And that's what you'll find in the manifesto. So we started with values. So a value in threat modeling is something that has relative worth, merit, or importance. Okay, these are the things that are crucial to the threat modeling process. This is the core of it. So while there is value in the items on the right, as you're going to see in a moment, we value the items on the left more. So what you're going to see in just a moment is I will go through the values that we describe in the manifesto. You're going to see on the left that thing that is of greatest value, that thing that brings the oomph to threat modeling, the thing that makes threat modeling so powerful for our organizations. And on the right, those things that, while they might have some value, they also tend to be the things that aren't as helpful when we're talking threat modeling. So let's dive in, because as you're thinking about how you're going to launch a methodology, it is so crucial that these values are at the core of what you do. So our first value, a culture of finding and fixing design issues. Well, that sounds like duh, right? Over checkbox compliance. How about this for an example of checkbox compliance? Hey, you got to have a parking space that's marked with a handicap sign and only allows handicap parking. Great, we did it. We marked a space. Nobody can park there. Completely useless, but by God, we're compliant. And isn't that a frustration that so many of us have in our organizations? We do the security thing not because it makes us more secure. We do the security thing to check a box. Maybe we sit down with something like PCI and we look at this laundry list of things and we say, all right, I'm going to check off all these boxes. But none of the things that we actually implement work together. None of them actually are effective countermeasures. They just are a way for us to say, yeah, we did this thing. Or maybe it's NIST. Maybe it's the 800-53 controls. All of those controls that are specified in NIST 853. Why do we do them? Do they even apply to our organization? That's what we're talking about with checkbox compliance. Now, when it comes to threat modeling, so often threat modeling is just done because security said this is required, so thou must do it. That's not creating a culture. That's not making the focus finding and fixing design issues. That's making a culture of creating a bunch of drawings that describe our system and sitting down and having meetings and doing it all because InfoSec said we had to. That's not what threat modeling should be about. Threat modeling needs to be about that culture, that collaboration, bringing people together in a way that they all understand it. Okay, this is going to help us highlight where we might have challenges in our design. Maybe they're flaws. Maybe it's just we have questions about the design, but we understand them in the light of threats that we are likely to face with this system. And so now we can react to them. We want to build that culture with threat modeling. So it's not just an activity or a requirement, but it's something that we constantly think about. Our engineers are thinking about it. Our SREs, our operations support analysts, our product managers, our project teams, our business, everybody needs to be a part of that. That's where threat modeling gains value for us. So yeah, maybe checkbox compliance is helpful. Maybe those requirements get us somewhere. They make sure we're at least doing it. But if we're not fixing and finding the design issues, what's the point? So the culture of finding and fixing design issues, that's the value here. Moving on. Our next value, The next thing that we thought was crucial. You've heard me say this now probably, I don't know, at least 8 or 9 times I've used the C word. Not that C word. Come on. Stay with me, folks. I know it's late in the day, but I'm talking about collaboration, people and collaboration. Those things that Puppet and CircleCI highlighted in that report. People and collaboration over processes, methodologies, and tools. We're not going to get there with tools. I can't count on my hands and feet combined the number of people who I've seen suggest, well, we just need an automated tool to do threat modeling. There's no value in that. If I just have this tool, it runs, it does this thing, yeah, it might highlight some design concerns. It might show me where this design is off, or maybe I need to implement an additional configuration. It might be able to suggest certain things, but that's not the heart of the value of threat modeling. Threat modeling, again, going back to that culture, it's bringing everybody together, the exchange of ideas, getting perspectives on these things from people who come from the engineering org, who come from our business lines, who are supporting our operations environments on a day-to-day. That's what we're looking for in terms of threat modeling. So in a classic environment, yeah, oftentimes they were these large meetings. Now I went to the other extreme with my example before about the user story, where I said you're going to have one, business person, maybe it's a business analyst, maybe it's a product manager, whomever, that's writing that particular user story, and you're just going to have them do it. Maybe we go somewhere in between. Is there a way that we can bring multiple people into that process of putting that information in the user story? How do your user stories get created? Is it just one person that creates them? Or do you have people who are sitting together and writing these things who have different perspectives? Do you have committees that get together and talk about what user stories are going to be most important that they want to put on the backlog? Leverage that same process. Get those diverse ideas, get people talking, get that threat information out there. Now, if you put that threat information into your user story, I covered that in that example, how that creates collaboration and it pushes the information all the way through to your devs, to your ops. You can give security the heads up. So now suddenly we can leverage that. And that's so much more important than the process, methodologies, and tools. Yes, we need to have processes for doing this. We need to have the methodologies for doing this. And whatever tools we do use, whether it's templates, reports, whatever, maybe it is even some automated tooling that can help us. That's not where the value is coming from, though. The value is coming from bringing people together so they can all understand, share their ideas, and really talk about what this user story represents in terms of the overall system. So, valuing people and collaboration over processes, methodologies, and tools. Build this. Make this one of your focal points as you're building out your threat modeling methodology. Next. Threat modeling is a journey of understanding over a security and privacy snapshot. We're really used to snapshots in security, aren't we? We run vulnerability scans. What do we say about them? Well, this is a snapshot of the environment as of when we ran that scan. Here's the vulnerabilities. We pen test a web application. Same thing. Heck, I was a consultant for 8 years. We actually wrote that in our contracts. This is a point-in-time assessment. What does that do for us? That means that once a year, maybe less, maybe more, probably less, but let's say we test our apps once a year. Once a year, I'm going to have to go through a pen test, and I'm going to get a bunch of new work to do. And now for the year following, I'm going to have to work through all those vulnerabilities that someone gave me on a report. That's what I'm seeing as an engineer. And so then I get through all those. Okay. Oh, I closed all those out. And what happens next? Well, we run the next pen test. And hey, there's all new vulnerabilities. And what happens? Our engineering teams get frustrated. Our risk organization gets frustrated. Our executives get frustrated. Why are we spending all this time remediating vulnerabilities and we just keep coming back and having more and more and more? That's what happens. And in threat modeling, we do the same thing. Think about that. We go in and we do a threat modeling, say we have some type of, threshold in which, a change that's so X large has to go through a threat modeling process. So we go through and we draw up those big data flow diagrams. We go through Stride, we categorize out all these threats, and then we say, oh, we're going to build in all these countermeasures. We put that all out there, and now we're done, right? We did our threat model. Well, what happens with all those subsequent smaller changes? The point of threat modeling is to make this a journey of understanding. What do I mean by that? What did these 15 goofy individuals who wrote this manifesto mean when they said a journey of understanding? It means that we're constantly growing and learning and getting new perspectives on the system. So it's not just we take this one-time snapshot. Okay, this is the way the system looks today. Good, I'm happy. No, we're constantly trying to grow and learn more. So as I start to shift this into, say, a user story again, those are happening all the time. We're getting new insights into the threat posture of our application, of our system, of our product. That's what we want threat modeling to be for us. It's that journey of understanding. Security snapshots don't help us. They give us that point in time and they're irrelevant right after the next change happens. That's not where we want to be. So we can do more here. We can be better at this. We just need to focus on this idea of continuous improvement. Get away from this idea that we're going to secure the world. Security for far too long is thought that, well, we're going to find all the problems, we're going to fix all the problems, and then we're secure. Whether we say it or not, that's been the thinking because our actions show it. Get out of that mindset. Start to build this mindset that security is a constant journey. We're just trying to get better tomorrow than we are today. This next one might seem kind of obvious to you. Threat modeling values doing threat modeling versus talking about it. How does that sit with you? Pretty obvious, but believe it or not, this is a crucial thing that oftentimes we lose sight of. Now think about it. How many of you have talked about skydiving? How many of you have talked about how neat it would be, how cool it would be, how scary it would be, how you want to do it, how you would never do it? How many of you have actually gotten in a plane and done it? Not me. I've talked about it. I've never done it. So where's the value in that? If I talk about it, sure, I can talk about all the greatness of threat modeling. I can sit here and do a 50-minute talk at CircleCityCon telling everybody how great threat modeling is. But if I'm not doing it, if I'm not out there making it happen, where's the value in that? There isn't. And it's the same for any organization. As we look to implement threat modeling, we need to make sure that we get to doing it. So if I'm building out a methodology, I've got to avoid the paralysis by analysis. I've got to avoid that situation where I spend so much time trying to develop a methodology and make it perfect and make it wonderful that I never get to the point of actually doing threat modeling. Find the value by actually doing it. Even if it's imperfect, get to doing it. Your first jump out of a skydive or your first skydive out of a plane probably isn't going to go exactly the way you want because you're not going to be able to do it by yourself. You're going to have to, you get certified by doing tandem jumps. So how do we leverage this? We can't within our organizations expect our threat modeling methodology to be perfect out of the gates. We can ask for help. We can bring in people who understand this. But the key is to get something started. Even if it's small, even if it's simple, even if we know there's issues with it, get to the point that you're actually doing something, because that's what's going to enable that continuous improvement and get you out of that whole mindset of snapshots. It's going to help you just start getting better. And as you continuously improve your products or your systems, you're also continuously improving your methodology. You started with something simple, but you're doing it. As you do it, you learn how to make it better. and you keep making your methodology better. So don't sit there and talk about it. Don't talk about how you're going to do it. Just start doing it. From a security perspective, how can you just start doing it? Do you have to sit down and talk to 40 people, get them all in a room and say, hey, we want to start doing a threat modeling methodology? At some point, you probably have to get buy-in and adoption for it. But how can you start bringing threat modeling, these core concepts? How can you bring that to your organization sooner? How can you make that happen without sitting down to talk about it and just do it? That's where you can find extra value in threat modeling. Now, you've heard me say continuous improvement how many times? I don't know. I lost count. I wasn't really actually counting anyway. Continuous refinement, sound familiar? Kind of synonymous, right? Our last value. Continuous refinement over a single delivery. This is where I'm talking about how do we make our threat models better and better over time. We're not going to just deliver a perfect threat model ever. Nobody I have ever met has sat down and just built a threat model with all the diagrams and everything else, turned it in, and everybody said, wow, this is perfect. There's nothing we could have done differently here. It's wonderful. We are now secure. Yay! No, you're not. Nobody has a perfect threat model. Artists don't sit down and in one night create a sculpture and sell it the next day. Artists can spend years sculpting something. And at the end of it, they might even decide they don't like it and they throw it out. But they're always trying to refine it. They're always coming back to it, making little changes here and there, tweaking, making it look better, making it match their vision, adjusting it. Maybe they realize that they got the eyes just slightly off. So I'm going to adjust the eyes and make them look like they're happier eyes, or they're looking in a particular direction. We want that to be the same when it comes to threat modeling. Just trying to deliver a standardly formatted threat model document or series of documents, that doesn't get us as much value as continually improving and refining that process by which we create the threat model in the first place. Because remember, we're getting all the value out of the collaboration. The process of threat modeling is where the value is coming from. So as we refine that process and get better and better at it, we gain more value from it. If all we care about is the end product that we deliver at the end of our threat modeling process, well, then we're not really getting the value that we could be from threat modeling. So that's the last of our values. Those values are meant to define, here is the core of what is important when we talk threat modeling. But now we're going to talk about the next piece, which are the principles. So within the threat modeling manifesto, we defined our values and then we broke it down into principles. And what do I mean by principles? Well, the principles just describe fundamental truths about threat modeling. So this is just taking it to a new layer of granularity. And so when I think about the principles, there's 4 principles that we focused on. The first principle reads, the best use of threat modeling is to improve the security and privacy of a system through early and frequent analysis. That early and frequent analysis. This is that push left, right? Think about that. Okay, back once again to our user story example. If I'm doing it at the user story, how could I possibly get any earlier with my threat model? If I'm doing it in the user story, it's happening frequently. That analysis is happening every time a new user story drops on my backlog. That's pretty frequent. That's going to help me to ensure that we are consistently and continuously improving the security and privacy of that system. So this is a critical piece. This is an absolute truth when it comes to threat modeling, that its best use is when we're using it early and we're doing it frequently. Second principle of threat modeling is that threat modeling must align with an organization's development practices and follow design changes in iterations that are scoped to manageable portions of the system. Doing it in iterations, making them manageable portions. How many more times are you going to hear me use the term user story? Put threat modeling in your user story. Hello. That makes it iterative. That makes them manageable portions. When we try to boil the ocean, that's what created all that frustration with threat modeling. It's why I had developers telling me when I was a consultant that threat modeling simply could not be done in a DevSecOps culture. It can. We just need to make it manageable. It can't be this huge heavy lifting thing. So break your threat modeling down into those manageable scopes. How can you do it? If you don't use a user story, find another way to focus on just a single logical area of that system, that application, whatever it is that you're working on, and get your value there. That is a true, absolute principle of threat modeling, is that that's where it must align with your organization in that way, or people are not going to adopt it and they're going to throw it away. Next, the outcomes of threat modeling are only meaningful when they are of value to the stakeholders. This, again, should be duh, but so often we write threat models, as I said before, we write threat models for the security people. It's security people writing threat models for security people. That's pointless. Remember, our goal here is to inform the design and development of that system, the testing and monitoring of that system. So threat modeling, it's a principle of threat modeling that's only a value if it, or it's only useful and meaningful if it's of value to our stakeholders. And then finally, dialogue is key. The documents just record our discoveries. The dialogue, the collaboration that you've heard me ramble on about over and over again, that's where we find the value in threat modeling. That is a principle of threat modeling, that the dialogue is the key. That dialogue doesn't have to be a bunch of people sitting in a room talking. It can be Slack channels. It can be documentation in the user story. It can be conversations in a committee as a user story is being written. However it occurs, though, that dialogue should happen. And then you can document the threats and record that elsewhere. But that is a principle of threat modeling. So it's just about time for me to wrap up. But I always like to leave folks with a quote before I go. And this one from Albert Einstein, I don't think it'd be any more perfect for what we've just been talking about for the last 45 minutes. Genius is making complex ideas simple, not making simple ideas complex. All of these frameworks, PASTA, Octive, Stride, they made threat modeling so much more complex than it ever needed to be. We just need to be asking the question of ourselves, what could possibly go wrong? And then we just need to think about, what are we going to do about it? That's threat modeling. Make it happen. Make it a part of your organization. Gain that value. And if you want to talk about it more, please reach out to me. Here's my Twitter handle. If you don't follow me, I would love to have you follow me. I would love to talk to you more about it. I love sharing ideas. I love to hear what other people think. I love to have them challenge me. If I said something you think is completely off the wall and wrong, let me know. Let's talk about it. Do it respectfully, please. But yeah, let's have some fun. Let's chat. You also follow me on LinkedIn. Connect with me there if that's your preference. My website, where you'll find my blog, future speaking engagements, all that happy stuff. A contact form if you want to get in touch with me. That works too. So finally, thank you so much to CircleCityCon for having me today. I'm going to be back with you tomorrow. We're going to talk more about DevSecOps, but I'm just thrilled to have been here and be able to share this with you. Thank you to my organization, S&P Global Ratings, for making it possible for me to be here today. But most importantly, thank you to all of you for being here. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something useful from this. Check out the Threat Modeling Manifesto. Hopefully you saw the link up there multiple times. If not, it's threatmodelingmanifesto.org. Go check it out. Check out the patterns and anti-patterns we didn't talk about today. I think you'll find the value. You'll find how that will make things easier for you. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, but thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.